Well, good morning, friends. Welcome to Upper Valley Vineyard Live on this fabulous June 14th. Yeah, I should probably turn that thing off. Here, that's probably better. And I am very excited about today. Today is Alana's 18th birthday. And you may or may not have seen the video that was live streaming before this. That was actually my daughter Alana, along with my son Ethan, leading worship. So that was pretty exciting, pretty cool. Anyways, just wanted to let you know a few things before we move on further. And I am just going to make sure that our stream is working correctly, and it is. It looks good. All right, so a couple things that I wanted to mention in case you didn't know. One of them was Alana's birthday. She turns, I don't know how you say that, 18 today.
Turns 18.
And we did our birthday morning tradition that some of our children think they've risen above that, but not her. She delighted her daddy's heart. We went and got some Krispy Kreme donuts. Reminiscing, Facebook puts those things up on your timeline sometimes, like, your memories. Remember this time? And it did one from 10 years ago when she was 8. And we lived in the northeast El Paso, but there were no Krispy Kremes there. There was one across town on the far east side, so we drove out there. And they were building a new Ross, and something happened with the signage there, and so it said Ross, and then underneath it was missing letters, so it said Dres, D-R-E-S, Faux, F-O, Les, L-E-S. And so I've just never forgotten that. Ross, Dres, Faux, Les. What a great time that was. Anyways, happy you could join us. The other thing that I want to let you know is, if everything goes according to plan, next Sunday, Father's Day, June 21st, Upper Valley Vineyard is going to reopen our building, our sanctuary, and so we're going to get together and have our service in person. And we'll talk some more and have some signage out as far as some recommendations, what you should or shouldn't do when you come in person. And if you are against coming or apprehensive, nervous, talk to us about that and let us know. But if you're really not feeling up for coming, we're going to do our best to try to get our equipment going so that we can live stream our service, so that you can come in person, or you can join us afterwards. Randy, hey my friend, thanks for stopping in for a minute. So yeah, we're gonna go for it next Sunday in person. We're gonna see how that works. Some things that I have a good friend here in El Paso that I've known since he was a wee lad. His name's Joey Walker, and he married this amazing doctor, Danielle. They are part of the Anaheim Vineyard and actually just put a video out recently about churches reopening and different things. And some things that I think it's important to remember when we do get back in person is, for the most part, singing is not the scary thing that a lot of people might lead you to believe it is. If you're wearing a mask and singing, it's kind of difficult. You can still do it, but I've done a few things. COVID, the virus, and many viruses, they need air to move around, and so if you sing and they say you create droplets, that's probably true. But in order for it to spread, singing is not the same as blowing or coughing or sneezing, and so it doesn't really propel the moisture quite the same way, the droplets. And so we're going to be singing. You're welcome to come and sing, and if you're nervous about that, we'll have plenty of room to spread out. Like I said, if you're still really super nervous about that, we don't want to push or force anybody to do something that they're just not going to really be able to be fully present. So feel free to tune in from home if we can get that working like we hope. And then the other things that we've been learning is that obviously if you have symptoms, any kinds of symptoms like coughing, shortness of breath, fever, allergies are really killing you and you're just sneezing a ton, things like that, then stay home. Please stay home and enjoy the service from home. And then the other thing is that if you don't have symptoms, but you're worried what will happen if I show up and later I find out that I was sick, I just wasn't showing any symptoms, you don't actually spread COVID when you're asymptomatic. So all the research points to that. Again, I'm not an expert on this, and I don't want to mislead anybody. So do your research homework if you want. If you need some resources, I can point you to where I'm getting my information from. I believe them to be reliable sources. But we'd love to join you and see you in person. I was actually thinking about this a little bit, and I'm going to be talking about this, and it's going to tie into the message, the brief message that I have for you today. But one of the things that we really miss by not being in person is we miss intimacy. And I was thinking about this. A lot of people are kind of like, that word's kind of loaded. But I was even thinking about it in the context of a relationship, a husband and wife or a family. And just imagine trying to have a marriage where you were never together, where you were always in two different places and only being able to stream conversations one way to each other for the most part. Well, wow, that wouldn't be such an enjoyable marriage over time, would it? You lose a lot of the value, the intimacy, the closeness that you have. And so we were really meant, as relational beings, we were meant to have intimacy with one another in friendship, in relationship, within the church family. So we weren't really meant to get comfortable doing life apart and lacking that key part of relationship. Again, just want to encourage you, if you can make it, come. And if you're uncomfortable, please don't. Please stay home. We're going to take all the precautions that we believe will help keep everybody safe. But ultimately, trust your judgment on that. And again, questions, please reach out. Today I'm going to be reading from Matthew 25. And if you aren't familiar with Matthew 25, I'm going to give you a second to turn your way there. And this portion of Matthew 25 that I'm going to be reading, I'm focused on verse 40, but I'm going to start around verse 31. And this is talking about the final judgment. This is talking about, by the way, we do church as a family, so you might hear some like fighting, screaming, you might see some hair pulling. We might kind of have to do this like, what are those shows, those controversial shows? Maury Povich, is that one of them? I feel like his name's popping up. We might have to turn the camera when hair starts getting pulled out and people start kicking and doing like flying elbows on each other and stuff.
If we look really distracted all of a sudden, some kid is probably acting up.
Yeah.
Off screen.
Every once in a while, a kid loses an eye or breaks something or loses a foot or a limb or something. But we'll keep going. We're committed to you. If you could see what we're seeing right now, our kids are slapping and fighting with each other over
If the camera
bubbles.
suddenly falls over, then you know why.
We might actually turn the camera to them for a little while so you could see what they're doing. I think you guys might. Would you guys enjoy that? So we're gonna start in Matthew 31, and here let's videotape this because we don't want people to miss out on this.
Yes.
Oh, what they stopped? Oh, bummer, guys. I don't know what happened. They quit fighting. They suddenly turned into like angels. They had halos and wings and we just... Who, us?
The power of the camera.
If we could always have that.
Useful parenting tool.
Yes. All right, so getting back to where we were, and we're going to trust our kids not to fight over something as trivial as bubbles. At least not right next to where we're live streaming. So, can you guys hang with us for a little bit? Okay. Matthew 25. So in verse 31 we read, but when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit upon his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered in his presence, and he will separate the people as a good shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will place the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left. Now, when they say goats here, they don't mean the greatest of all times. So they're not saying that LeBron James will go over here and the sheep will go over here, or Tom Brady, or whoever you think the greatest of all time is. That's not what they're talking about. My sports fan friends that are watching, they mean goats, the animals, goats. Okay, so he'll place the sheep at his right hand and the goats at the left. And then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then these righteous ones will reply, Lord, when did we ever see you hungry and feed you? Or thirsty and give you something to drink? Or a stranger and show you hospitality? Or naked and give you clothing? When did we ever see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will say, I tell you the truth. When you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were doing it to me. It goes on to say, and then he's going to turn to the others that that didn't do anything, that didn't care for those that were just mentioned. And he's going to say, away from you, you're cursed. And they're going to say, when did we ever see you and not do these things? We never saw you hungry. We never saw these things. And then he flips it around. He says, when you refuse to help the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were refusing to help me. That is, if you really just let that sink in for a moment, that is so heavy. This has been an interesting season, right? We all ad nauseum have discussed what it's like. COVID-19 strikes, and all of a sudden we're confined to our homes, and we can't go to some really important places like the bowling alley, or to restaurants, two of my favorite places to visit. I usually visit a bowling alley and a restaurant every Tuesday night when I bowl in my league, and I wasn't able to do that. And just the impact that it's had, not being able to be around people and to be uncomfortable, to go into stores and wear masks. We've talked about all that stuff, and just it's an interesting time, right? Then you add to that the things that we're dealing with, facing issues of racism in our country, and people are all over the spectrum on that. And some people feel like they have to have an answer or a response, and might not even have been prepared to give a response, but they do anyways, for better or for worse. Say, Ella dear, you're bumping the camera right now, so people might start getting seasick. Thanks. So what I wanted to talk about is during this season, there's been a lot of interesting things. And I'm going to talk a little bit about me growing up, a little bit about some of my family members. One of my sons was gassing up the other day. And if you didn't know, sometimes people have a hard time pegging what my nationality is. I'm Korean. I'm actually half Korean. My mother was Korean, and I'm half white, and that comes through my father's side of the family, which our origins trace back to, I think, the Irish settled old world, like Bavaria, so like through the Norman invasion and different things. Like, I think I have some Irish roots that ended up becoming German roots. So I find it fascinating to study genealogy and where I've come from. But I am Korean. Now, I have my oldest son looks very Korean. He's obviously Asian. And if you're Korean or can sometimes people have a hard time identifying, but if you're Asian, you would generally be able to tell he's Korean. The other day he was at a gas pump, and the gas pump was pretty far away from the other pumps, and there were several people gassing up, and he got singled out for not wearing a mask. He got yelled at. Somebody actually confronted him and started saying, "Where's your mask?" And they just started shaming him in front of other people. Now, there were other people also not wearing masks, and they happened to be white. And this guy was not mad at any of them, but he was picking on my son. And it just started, sometimes that kind of awakens some thoughts and memories of when I was growing up, and I got picked on for having slanted eyes, for not looking like my other classmates. The city I live in, El Paso, Asians make up somewhere around 1% of the population or so. And in many schools, you could find yourself being one of the only Asians, if not the only Asian. You could be one of 3 or 4 Koreans, in your entire school of hundreds to thousands of people. So I'm gonna just sit you right here for a second, dear. Thank you for those beautiful dance moves. And so I was just reflecting on that, and just how what that did for me was it led me to a life of violence. At a very young age, as early as kindergarten, I was violent, and I would do some pretty horrible things. Somebody called me. This didn't have anything to do with my race, but just because I had learned to respond in violence so much, somebody called me Princess Leia one time, and my answer was, this is back kind of before safety scissors really existed, I stabbed him in the arm with a pair of scissors. I mean, I was like 5 years old, and that was how I responded. Or later in life, when I was in elementary school, I was kind of a scrawny kid. I've since recovered from that, gotten some healing, and but when I was young, I got picked on a lot. Scrawny Asian kid, and people would start fights with me, and I was scrappy, and I would never give up. I would never give up. I'd fight to the bitter end, and so usually I would win. I started beating people up, and that kind of filled me up a little bit. And so I was learning that was the way to do it. And because I was a scrawny kid, because I was the underdog, like if I was at school, a teacher would come out and see what happened, and they'd kind of laugh about it, like, oh my gosh, this little kid's beating up this bigger kid, and I wouldn't get in trouble for it. So I could get away with it. It didn't lead to good things. As I got older, I didn't get less violent. And I started getting kind of this cocky attitude, like I was untouchable. Anyways, what I went through, and thankfully I met Jesus as a teenager, and he radically transformed my life. And that violent part of who I was, that's not really part of my identity anymore, at least not in that way. Sometimes I have violent responses to certain things, and I hope and want to say that it's because I should. I want to, when the time calls for it, have the right response to things. And I want to stand up for people who need to be stood up for. It's something that's close to me. Now, what I went through and the things that I dealt with, those are my story. And they don't make me an expert on anybody else's story. They don't make me an expert on somebody else's narrative or what they're going through. And so today, when I see what black people are going through, I don't know. I'm not an expert on that. What I have learned to do is ask questions, and so I try to talk to people and get what's going on, what their experience is like. I have a beautiful black daughter-in-law and 3 beautiful black grandchildren, and I love them to death. And it pains me to hear some of the stories of what they go through. I'll hear the things that they're doing, and I'll hear the way that my son and daughter are talking to them and teaching them how to navigate those things. And as I hear them, sometimes I'll catch myself thinking, I don't know that I would do it that way, or I don't know that I have thought about that, but I'm not an expert on what they're going through. And so I take a step back and I ask questions, and I watch, I observe, and I learn. And one of the things that I've seen happen is we can sometimes start to nitpick and try to find people who agree with us. And so if we don't understand something, or if we want to minimize something, a very popular thing, for instance, is I've seen people sharing, usually it's the same 1 or 2 or 3 videos, but I've seen people start sharing videos of black people saying that that's not their story, and that certain things aren't the answer, or they don't feel a certain way, and they become pretty popular. And I get it. Sometimes we're looking for something that resonates with us. But one of the things that I've been learning, and my friend Gino, who's a vineyard pastor, who's become a great voice on this. I love how Gino creates a space where we can have conversations and talk about these things rather than try to shut down conversations. Sometimes becoming the expert can shut down a conversation. And I love that Gino, even with his own experience, he's able to share things, but he's able to draw people into a conversation that I think is healthy and good. And it's not about everybody agreeing. It's not about agreeing first or believing something first and then coming in. It's saying, hey, I'm going to approach this with a humble ignorance. And that's a phrase we've been using quite a bit over the past several months. Learning how to have a humble ignorance. Learning that we don't know everything that somebody else is going through, but also looking for consensus. It's one thing to hear 1 or 2 people say something about what they're going through. But just like you would not want to be whatever your ethnicity is, whatever your race is, whatever your skin color is, you probably wouldn't want to have to represent your entire race. Everybody that shares your skin color. As a Korean, I don't want to be responsible for representing every Korean, right? But sometimes we kind of will do that. We'll cling to certain things and we'll say this should represent what black people think, and I agree with that, so we'll go with that. And in fact, all of a sudden we'll share it, and a bunch of people should agree with this. But what I've learned to do is listen for consensus. What are a lot of black people saying right now? What are they going through? listening to that and saying, hey, you know what? I hear that. I hear you. That matters. That's important to me. I want to understand this better. I want to understand how to support better. I want to understand how to fight better. This verse from Matthew 25, when Jesus is talking about the least of these, I was listening to an episode of the Ferment podcast. It's a podcast that Adam Russell from Vineyard Worship produces, and it's conversations on worship and transformation. It's such a beautiful podcast, and I get so much out of it. But I was listening to an episode, and Seuss Courtney from the UK was on, and as she was sharing just something about, I've heard this before, and I've heard this verse before, and I've thought about the least of these before, but something when she said just triggered this thought that right now, who are the least of these around us? Who are the least of these in our communities, in our world? Right now, globally, we're dealing with some stuff, but especially in America, we're seeing this. The least of these are my black brothers and sisters, and I don't say that as I want to be careful and make sure people are hearing this. When I say the least of these, I don't mean that they're less than, but they're being treated like less than. They're not being represented well. They're not being stood up for well. The responses that we're seeing are not the result of something that just happened once and the media blew out of proportion. And I'm not saying that the media is perfect or gets it right, or that stories that are shared through social media, that all those always accurately reflect everything. I'm not getting into all that right now. But talk to people, and you'll hear stories that have never made the headlines. You'll hear stories about how people have been treated unfairly. My grandson, who's done yard work for me, like just walking down the street in his neighborhood, and somebody sees him and thinks he's up to no good. And then later they stop his parents, not realizing those are his parents, saying, hey, you got to look out. I've seen this guy walking around here, and he kind of matches the description of somebody who's causing trouble around here. They roll down the window to their back seat, and there he is. And the guy says, oh, I'm sorry, my mistake. But we deal with this stuff. It doesn't always make the headlines. It doesn't always end up on the news. But it's all around us. And so we talk about consensus, like really getting to hear the stories. This isn't just one person sharing an isolated story, or two people, or a small group of people. This is a people as a whole that have dealt with something that is just unthinkable that you would have to deal with on an ongoing basis. And we have an opportunity to do something. And I don't know that we're gonna change the world. Sometimes we kind of, I'm careful how I say this because I dream big, but sometimes we can dream too big. We can make something so big that we can't do it. It's just, really, if you think about it, we're going to change the world. Okay, where do you start? What do you do? So one of the things that I want to encourage you to do, if you're trying to figure out, how do I respond to this? How can I take some responsibility for what's going on? How can I minister and bless the least of these? And ultimately bless the Lord in doing that. Listen. That's a big one. Listen. If there's consensus out there, listen. What is the consensus saying? I'm not saying that consensus is always right, but when you're listening to a people that have been oppressed and have been mistreated and judged and abused and killed for the color of their skin, listen. Listen to the stories people have to share about that. Get to know, become familiar with them, try to understand them if you can. Maybe that will help develop some empathy and some compassion for the plight of the black people in our communities and in our world. Something that I've become very familiar with is getting proximate. And this goes back to what I was talking earlier about, like our push to try to get back together in person and do things in a COVID world, hopefully soon a post-COVID world. But that's the intimacy, and a way that I've learned to say that as it relates to justice is getting proximate. Get close to these situations that you're hearing about. I mad props and shout out to my friend Caleb, who owns the Tropical Smoothie Cafe franchises here in El Paso. He has a big heart for people and for the community, and so when he first heard about the protests and the riots happening in Minneapolis, as a former law enforcement officer, the first thing he did was he bought a ticket, and the very next day was in Minneapolis and spent several days in Minneapolis going to protests like being in the midst of the tension and talking to people and asking questions and wanting to know, what are you going through? What can I do about this? And here's somebody who, he's a pretty level-headed guy, so he's not saying all of a sudden, wow, I mean, he was a law enforcement officer. He has seen things in law enforcement, and so he's wanting to learn about like all the different sides to all this and figure out like what's a good, healthy response to this. How can we support people? How can we not become abusive or hurtful or hateful in the process? And that's one of the things that really grieves me about this, is sometimes in our pain, it reminds me of when I was younger. Sometimes in whatever state that we are, our response can become violent. Sometimes we can push back, and we push back or we speak up or say something, and maybe we come on too strong. And when we come on too strong, this is something I'm learning from my friend Gino that I was mentioning earlier, in a conversation I was having with him through some text messages. Sometimes we come on too strong. We feel like we haven't done enough, or maybe we haven't done anything, and we want to stand up for our black brothers and sisters, and so we do that. But we come on too strong, and then we have a negative impact or a negative effect. And so that's part of where I want to encourage us to do this with humility, to do this with love, to do our best to understand what we can do, and then to have a response that's not just like flying off the cuff, not just an emotional response, but a measured response, something that we've actually thought through and tried to figure out, what can I do to make the most positive impact that I can? What can I do that's actually going to help? And you know what? It's hard to find consensus on that right now. You'll hear different things depending on who you talk to, but make it something specific. Make it something local. That's part of the story of the church. Is yes, we're the church worldwide. We're the Christian church. We're the church that Christ came to start. But when we make something so big, the church is going to, yes, I get that, but what are we going to do locally and specifically in our communities? What's something that we can do to impact that? One of the things that we've been doing in our church is we've just been saying we're going to keep on pressing in and having uncomfortable conversations and try to better understand the issues that are at hand of our day, and then start talking about what is the right response. What's a response that can be impactful in the right way, that can actually generate the right kind of momentum. So I appreciate you all tuning in and just listening to me rant on that for a little bit. But I want to encourage you, get proximate. If there's things that are going on around you, you know what? You don't have to agree with them. You don't have to believe that they're right. You don't have to suddenly change the way you think so that you can participate or get close. Just get close wherever you are, as you are. Get close to people, get close to these circumstances and situations. Maybe you even want to show up to a protest, and I'm not saying that you need to go to protest. If you don't feel like you want to protest, don't go show up and just fake it. But maybe the way you can support people that are protesting is just asking them questions. Hey, what are you protesting for? Tell me some of your story. Just getting to know people, getting to build relationship and community with people. To me, one of the most beautiful things about unity, the way that it's expressed in the body of Christ, is unity is not being homogeneous. It's coming together with our differences and saying, we're different and we're together. And it's so powerful. I like to say diversity and unity. Some of you are 49ers fans. Me, I'm a Chiefs fan. But you know what? I can have unity with my fellow 49ers fans, even though we have diversity in the teams that we like. It might be you have different preferences and different beliefs about certain things. And we're on a journey in that. So as I close, I just want to encourage you, really press in, ask the Lord, ask your pastor, ask your church, talk about these things, have conversations. They're not comfortable. If we're honest with ourselves, these kinds of conversations, there's a lot of tension. Sometimes we just have to withhold, as somebody's talking, starting to formulate a response right away, and we just need to take a step back and slow down and just listen. Isn't that a lot of what our Christian journey really ultimately ends up being about, is listening? I find that that in anything I've ever done, the less I talk, the more I listen, the more I learn, the more I can become better at serving Christ in my community, among my family members. So, why don't we close in prayer? If you have any thoughts, any comments, reach out. If you have prayer requests, you can put them in the comments on this. You can also text us, email us, call us. We'd love to be praying for you. Think about you all, love you all. Lord, I ask that you would come in the middle of all sorts of craziness coming from all different directions. I pray that you would come and that you would help us to hear your voice. That you would help still our hearts and our minds and just help us to be in a place of where we can listen, where we can hear your voice, where we can hear the voices of the least of these. Would you forgive us for the times where we've ignored or just been oblivious to the need around us? I just can't think of anything more heartbreaking than to come face to face with you and have you say, here's all the times that I was in need and you didn't do anything about it. Here's all the times there were people that needed what I've given you to offer them and you didn't do anything. Would you forgive us for that, Lord, for the times where we just didn't want to be inconvenienced or it was uncomfortable, where we were distracted, whatever the reasons might be. And would you speak to us? Would you help us to find something specific that you're asking of us that we can say yes to? You give us everything that we need to do what you're asking of us, and we thank you for that. Also, just want to thank you, Lord, for what a privilege it was to get to spend these past several years with Millie Green being part of our service. So blessed by her life and her faithfulness and her feistiness. And just ask that you would continue to surround her family with your arms of love. That you would continue to comfort them, give them your peace. We love you, Lord. Thank you for how you're speaking to us. Thank you for loving us. In Jesus' name, amen. So, thank you guys for joining us today. If you're tuning in, hopefully we'll figure this live stream stuff out so that we can get a good reflection or representation of our in-person service next Sunday. Until then, am I missing anything? Karen, am I missing anything?
No,
Yes?
you covered it pretty well, huh?
Awesome. Thank you for stopping by, and we will see you the next time. Love you all. God be with you.